many of you have read the May issue of Wired magazine? Very good. Good. I know our staff and team have read it copiously a couple of times, and one of the reasons is that there is a terrific breakthrough, I think, concept and article called The Rise of Crowdsourcing. And I'll just read you the first line because it's incredibly provocative. It says, "Remember outsourcing? Sending jobs to India and China is so 2003. The new pool of cheap labor, everyday people using their spare cycles to create content, solve problems, even do corporate R&D." And when we read something like that, we have to know who the heck wrote it. Well, I was very, very pleased to find out that he not only lives in Brooklyn, he actually agreed to come here and be our visionary keynote speaker. His name is Mr. Jeff Howe. And again, for those of you who may not know him or may not know of his work writing about crowdsourcing, Jeff, you've probably read a lot of it. Jeff is a contributing editor at Wired magazine, where he covers the entertainment industry, among other subjects. Before coming to Wired, he was a senior editor at Inside.com and a writer at The Village Voice. In his 15 years as a journalist, he has traveled across the world working on stories that range from the impending water crisis in Central Asia to the implications of gene patenting. He is a man after our own heart with his eclectic interests in things of the world. He has written for U.S. News and World Report, The Washington Post, Mother Jones, and numerous other publications. He lives, as I say, right here in Brooklyn with his wife, Alicia Abbott, their daughter, Annabelle Rose, and I understand a miniature black lab named Clementine, right? And it gives me great, great pleasure to welcome Jeff Howe to our dialogue this morning. Jeff?
Jeff, what we're going to do is we're going to have a very interactive session here. And if you don't mind, I'm also not only going to ask some questions with Ken,
sure,
but if there's an opportunity, I'd like to have the audience ask you questions as well. But before
Please.
we do, it would be really nice to understand a little bit better what is crowdsourcing.
Sure. Well, I have two definitions. I call them the soundbite definition and the white paper definition. The soundbite definition is crowdsourcing is essentially the migration of open source software models, principles, to fields outside of software development. The longer, more complex definition is crowdsourcing is any time when a company or an organization takes a job traditionally performed by employees and outsources it to the crowd, usually over the internet, almost always in the form of an open call. I can run through some models just really quickly. Has anyone encountered the term? Is it something people are familiar with here? It's I prepared I'll just sort of briefly go through the history of how it came about. I was giving a speech, not too much unlike this one, and I was speaking about user-generated content. But in my research, I noticed that, and this is a couple years ago, and it was user-generated content was all the buzz, especially in the advertising industry. There had been a campaign called the Converse Gallery campaign, which was where the San Francisco ad agency for Converse had solicited people, young filmmakers, amateur filmmakers, anyone, graphic designers, to create their own ads. And the campaign was enormously successful. It generated, for almost no money spent on creative, by the way, like $1,000 per spot. An incredible response, and it did great for, I think Nike owns Converse, but it had an effect on the stock price, and I think revenues for that model of Converse were up like 30% that quarter. It was a big deal, and the advertising community paid a lot of attention to it. But what I noticed in speaking about this was this phenomenon was not at all restricted to content. And in fact, it was taking place in fields as disparate as product design. You had consumers who were designing their own stereo components. You had a case where an entire industry, integrated circuit design, had been revolutionized by what you could almost call downsourcing. Manufacturers had realized it was far more economically feasible to have the customers to basically create the tools for the customers to design the product themselves, and the customers were happy to do it. And it saved costs all around. So all that we needed, my editor and I, as we were discussing the phenomenon, was a word. And it was clearly something that other people were beginning to grasp at around the fringes. And he said, well, it's like outsourcing to the crowd. And I said, or crowdsourcing. And we spent several months, much longer than I generally would spend on a Wired feature, just scouring for examples of this and really looking at the business models behind them. The result was that I think it was in the June issue of Wired last year, the rise of crowdsourcing. The term itself went from 0 Google hits to about 200,000 Google hits within the first week, and it's now around 3 million. And I say that not out of the spirit of self-aggrandizement, but just that clearly we were able, and I say we, I credit my editor as the co-coiner of the term, and it certainly helped to have Wired Magazine as the platform. We struck a chord, and since then, I'm writing a book about crowdsourcing right now, and I'm looking at about 200 examples. So a lot's happened in a year, and I know that we're honoring Wikipedia, and it's an excellent choice because Wikipedia is the example of crowdsourcing. I think of it as the Big Bang. When someone looked at, and not just someone, Larry Sanger and Jimmy Wales, looked at what was happening in open source software and said, what if we applied this to a reference work? They were already trying to create an encyclopedia, but the idea was, yes, to create something online, but it was the standard model. They were seeking out experts to create these articles. After, I think, around 14 or 15 months, they had 12 articles. Well, they finally decided to use a wiki, which not many people had heard of in 2001. Does everyone know the wiki is? You guys are all Wired people, right? Okay, so they decided to use a wiki. Well, within months, they had, I think, 100, 200 articles. A couple months later, they had several thousand. And as most of you probably know, there are now several million articles on Wikipedia in the English language alone. The other languages are not that far behind. And are outpacing the English one in growth, which is about saturated. So that's hopefully a quick primer on crowdsourcing, and yeah, I'm happy to take questions. I'm very flattered to be here, and Louis, thanks for the introduction.
In fact, Wikia and Wikipedia were recognized by ICF for this year's Visionary of the Year Award. What I'd like to do is just start off and have you follow me. I have a question about trust. If you're asking people out there, and there's 6 billion people who might potentially respond to you, and if you have an incentive, that's one thing, or you might be asking based on a $10,000 prize. But if you're asking about, well, I got a problem with my computer, and they come back and they say, as the tech guys did for me one year, they said, yeah, we can solve your computer problems, but first of all, you got to give me all of your inner guts of your computer. And I kind of let them do it once, and I never let them do it again because I just felt nervous. How do you deal with crowdsourcing and the issue of trust and reliability?
It's a good question. It's a complicated question. It depends a lot on the model. I mean, the one thing that you notice, across all fields is that there are verification systems being set up and filtering systems set up. A big question, not just in crowdsourcing, but in online communities, has been how do you filter out the trolls from the meaningful contributors? And what we're seeing is, we can call it the Slashdot model or the dig model. I'll use Slashdot because they were the originators and they too rarely get credit. Slashdot is an online community for, it's called News for Nerds. And that pretty much describes it. It's an IT community, geeks coming together to discuss software and related issues. And because it was one of the first, it was a very large online community, they had to figure out a way to moderate the community so that the meaningful comments rose to the top and the flames, the stuff that didn't add anything to the dialogue, dropped to the bottom. And so what they did was use a combination of moderators, which everyone's heard of, but ingeniously, they moderated the moderators. And they set up this incredibly efficient, mostly automatic, regulated system so that someone who was regularly contributing meaningful comments would almost always appear at the top. And new people would have to gain reputation. And you now see this across all crowdsourcing models. Any sort of online community is putting this system to work, where people have to earn reputation. It's called the reputation economy now, and it's that too has sort of become a neologism that's gained a lot of traction. In this area, the reputation economy, and it's a prime motivation in crowdsourcing. People aren't necessarily working for very much money. I mean, the one aspect of crowdsourcing is that it's enormous. It's the cost saving. Well, I'll just say this: in photography, crowdsourcing stock photo agencies undercut their traditional competitors by over 99%. But what those photographers get, and what contributors to crowdsourcing models do get, is they get reputation. And reputation is something very meaningful in this economy. It leads to other work that is better paying, and it leads to status within the community. It's crowdsourcing is, I think, I haven't had time to talk about this a whole lot, but I didn't want to come here. I wanted to keep writing my book. And the only reason I did is because it's about communities. Communities drive crowdsourcing. The central part of my thesis is that the community and the information economy is the new it's the new firm. It is how production will be organized. And that is, and I'm sorry to ramble to your excellent question, but it's actually on point. Reputation is the currency in these communities, and that's how trust is built.
A very quick follow-up to the same idea, and that is the crowd is kind of chaotic. It's spontaneous. And if you're starting to curate the content and starting to moderate it, don't you lose a little bit of the spontaneity?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, like the emergence of any economic model, you're going to have trade-offs, and spontaneity is one of those. You're going to have a very bright 18-year-old who hasn't earned that reputation, and his first comments, and they may be his most significant, will get drowned out. What I would say is that crowdsourcing models comprise the kind of meritocracy that we never had before, and so the level of spontaneity, or let's rephrase it and say the ability for a bright idea is not accompanied by traditional, the contributor may not have connections to the industry, he may not know the right people, he may not have the right pedigree, but his contribution is far more likely in an online community to get noticed and to rise to the top through these filtering systems that are emerging than what we had 10 years ago.
The idea of distributed minds, just like distributed learning, is very interesting. That suggests that things can happen everywhere at the sacrifice of the place, and place being not only virtual but perhaps physical place. And I'm wondering, is there a way in which to lever this sort of activity? You could have crowdsourcing, but what about crowdsourcing at a physical location where you take advantage of the fact that you have a tremendous number of knowledge workers who are able to respond? And could that create an economy locally so that you in fact build a physical space as a result of that? Another metro tech where they're responding to these kinds of questions.
Sure. I'll answer with an anecdote. Place is actually a big part of my chapter on communities because the quick arc that I lay out is that the traditional conception of communities took a big blow in the last quarter of the 20th century. And you can blame whatever you want. You can blame white flight, the mall, television. But by any traditional yardstick, at least, communities diminished and began to disintegrate. The internet was first seen as sort of yet another villain in this process, but I think from the perspective of 2007 and the incredible popularity of social networking systems, it's clear that it's been a big boon to community. And anyone who doesn't think that the youth demographic is as equally interested in community as the greatest generation isn't spending much time on the internet. But what's been really fascinating is that although at first these internet communities were gathered strictly around affinity, just a quick statistic that always blows me away, New York Times, which is one of the best and most trafficked websites in the world, still has less traffic than DeviantArt.com, where millions of people come every day to discuss tattoos and wallpaper for your computer desktop and deviant art. And a lot of art is fantastic, by the way. I do not mean to diminish this community at all. But what we've started to see now is it goes under different terms, place blogging. A bunch of companies are starting to capitalize on this, is that people are coming back around to geography. Because, regardless of the death blow the internet dealt to distance, geography still matters. It still matters a lot. And physical interaction still matters. I'd argue probably as much as it ever has. No vibrant online community doesn't have a face-to-face counterpart, whether it be conventions, they hold meetups in the same city. The anecdote I was going to say was I just spent several months looking at Gannett, which is the largest newspaper publisher in America by circulation at least. And I spent a long time in the Cincinnati, I spent a week in the newsroom of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Newspapers are in trouble, probably all know. And unlike the music industry, they've shown a remarkable proclivity to experiment. One of the experiments that Gannett is doing is they've started in Cincinnati a site called CincyMoms.com. Total experiment. They didn't really advertise it. They just basically threw a shingle up on the web to see who would come. Their projected budget for the year was that they were hoping to earn $200,000 in revenue. They employed one editor who had previously been one of their top investigative reporters as a moderator, and one webmaster. So they have a staff of two. Well, they earned $275,000 in the first 8 weeks. Women, and especially young mothers, do not read newspapers, but they do need a local community, a website. There are lots of parenting sites on the web. There's Cafe Mom, there's parenting.com has its own. But to use an example from the story I'm writing about this, a mother in Cincinnati who suffered from several miscarriages doesn't just need to know that she needs to see an endocrinologist, something her primary care physician had not told her, but that she learned on Cincy Moms. She needs to know a good one in her neighborhood. And that's what she gets from Cincy Moms. It serves an incredible interest. It's no accident that the most popular topics on this forum are, the best pizza parlor to take your kids, the best hospital, the best labor and delivery wards in nearby hospitals. This is what, I think it's Ray Oldenburg, the great good place. This is, what he calls the third place. What we once had, what was the pub, the church, this was geographically based, and it is it's coming alive again on the internet, and it's geographically based.
But you're talking about Web 2.0, really, these online communities.
Sure.
This happens to be a little bit smaller in one location. Now, some of the things we know that are going on now is that devices that people are carrying are getting a lot more powerful. The applications are getting smarter. There's broadband everywhere. The city structures themselves are getting smarter with intelligent roadways. We see these coming in the big Asian metro cities. We know that emergency services are having greater interaction to smart infrastructure. I'm just curious how you see the social fabric changing as the devices get smarter. Because right now, those examples you just gave were really Web 2.0. Those are today applications. Mm-hmm. But we're getting to a point where the city's information is going to be broadcast live, and people are going to have devices that are really, really powerful. How do you think this next wave of technology change is going to affect cities and places?
Jeff, before you answer that question, I know you've got to get to the city at 12:30.
I can run over a bit.
Okay, so we've got about 2 minutes to answer that one, then we're going to keep moving ourselves.
Yeah, I apologize for my long answers.
No, they're great.
This one I can answer quickly, and it's a great question. It's very true. I'm talking about what's happening now. We've tended to think about, and I'm not saying anything that you all haven't heard before, but we tend to think about the computer as something that lives on our desktop or even lives on our briefcase, and that's a conception that's very soon is going to change dramatically, and the computer is going to be something that surrounds us. It's going to live on our device. It's going to live wherever we are, and so I actually think it's going to provide an opportunity for more social interaction, because it's going to free people in their engagement with the information age from a specific location. I have a Trio. It sucks. It's great. Don't get me wrong, but compared to what I'm going to have in 5 years, MySpace, it'll be on my device. Google, it'll be on my device. Cincy Moms, it will be on my device. Yeah, I think that can only aid and abet community formation.
Okay, very good. I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last remark in the keynote. Jeff Howe, thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, give him a big hand because he really went out of his way to come.
I just wanted to say one thing. Usually I come to these things, I'm able to hang out before, I'm able to hang out afterwards, and I always get my best ideas because people hear me speak and then they have brilliant things to say, far more interesting than anything I've said. If any of you are that person, I'm at Jeff Howe, JeffHowe, @wiredmag.com. It's really simple. It's just my name, @wiredmag. So if I've piqued interest or anything I'm writing about relates to projects you're working on, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, that's very generous of you, Jeff, and I just saw like everybody write it down, so watch out.
I hope so.
And good luck finishing your book. Maybe we'll have you back next year if you have time to talk a little bit about what you've discovered there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Jeff. Ken Zia, very much appreciate your time. John Young. Jeff Howe, ladies and gentlemen.